EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and is part of the Foundation's Young Africa Works programming.
Hello and welcome to this edition of EdTech Mondays Africa. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. On this edition, we are focusing on technology as an enabler of equity and inclusion in underserved communities around the continent. Inclusive education is recognized as a human right. The fourth Sustainable Development Goal of the United Nations 2030 Agenda calls for quality, inclusive, and equitable education for all people. Although access to education is improving, disadvantaged groups like girls, children from disadvantaged backgrounds, those living in rural areas, children with disabilities, and children from marginalized communities have little or no access compared to their peers. Citing by the World Bank shows that Sub-Saharan Africa has the highest rates of education exclusion of the 6 developing world regions. In a dozen Sub-Saharan African countries, including Kenya and Nigeria, school fees are the most reported financial need for most marginalized and low-income groups and households. And while there is increasing recognition of the value of inclusive education and the role of universal design for learning in supporting it, technology has considerable but largely unused potential to support inclusive education for persons with disabilities, learners from disadvantaged backgrounds, women and girls from marginalized groups, those living in rural areas, learners, among others. And so we ask, is there an opportunity for the use of technology in education to drive equity and inclusion for underserved students around the continent? You can share your thoughts with us on EdTech Mondays at mastercardfdn.org, and we'll be so glad to hear from you. Allow me to introduce my panelists. Terence Chibire, Senior Trainer and Head of AWS Academy at Azubi Africa. And we also have Vikas Porter, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Founder T4 Education, and Jean-Claude Nkurichiyimfuda, who is the Executive Director Agahozo Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda and is also a nominee for the Africa Education Medal. Gentlemen, it's great to have you on the show today. Let me start by asking us to introduce your organizations to us. Vikas, I'm going to start with you. Tell us a bit about T4 Education.
Thank you so much for this opportunity, and many congratulations to MasterCard Foundation for bringing us together. You know, we set up T4 Education at the beginning of the pandemic to help teachers and schools bridge that very important and crucial time when people were considering, well, what does the new normal mean for education in the height of the pandemic? And what we've come to realize is the importance of building community. Community is essential for making sure that we improve learning outcomes in schools. But importantly, community is what gets us over the line when we come to strengthen schools. And so through our platform, we conduct professional learning, we have research opportunities, and most importantly, we have huge engagement tools like prizes and awards that help to inspire and actually show us what is possible. And that's what T4 Education is committed to.
Azubi Africa is a brand name of Getinot as the GmbH of Munich, Germany. And we run our operations in Africa from our HQ in Accra, Ghana. Azubi has this ambition to train 10,000 young Africans and place them in tech jobs by 2025. That way, we have formed a number of academies. One of them is the AWS Academy. We also have a Data Science Academy, and we also have a Cisco Network Engineering and Security Academy within Azubi. Azubi is a German name that means apprentice. So we really learn by doing, and we encourage our learners to master the skill set by doing. We get them trained, we get them certified, and we get them placed.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me here. Such an honor and a pleasure. So Agahozo Shalom Youth Village was built as a response to the genocide against the Tutsi that took place in our country in 1994. In 2005, the founder learned about the genocide and realized that most kids who survived the genocide were placed in orphanages. Others were displaced in other places, no real parenthood. And so we decided to create a holistic approach to educating the most vulnerable kids. We went and looked at all kids in orphanages and built a village for 500 teenagers, of which 62% are young women because they have fewer access to education than young men. We opened our gates in 2008. All kids come from all 30 districts of the country. So we have a recruitment approach that goes to not only see them in their schools, but also we see them where they come from. We want to know who are the caretakers, who are the guardians of these kids, and then we bring them into our community.
Great, thank you so much. And even makes it more important that we're having this conversation around technology as an enabler for the underserved communities. And so, Vikas, I want to come back to you and generally to each and all of us. How important is it for us to include equity and inclusion in education? And how can technology as well support it?
Thank you for asking that question. It goes without saying that I believe equity and inclusion in education are probably the most important things. But here's why. Firstly, they promote equal opportunities. Second, we reduce disparities in education. There's also this very important aspect of fostering social cohesion, which I think is important. And of course, we all focus on enhancing economic development. Education is a powerful driver of economic growth and development. And when equity and inclusion are prioritized, it ensures that all individuals have the opportunity to acquire the necessary skills and knowledge to participate in the workforce and contribute towards economic development. But more importantly, you also have the ability through advanced gender equality, which is what the focus of this discussion kind of is. We know that equity and inclusion in education are particularly vital for promoting gender equality. Africa, like many regions, faces gender disparities in education, with girls often facing barriers such as early marriage, cultural norms, and lack of access to schools. By prioritizing gender equity and inclusion, girls can have an equal access to education, empowering them to fulfill their potential and contribute to society.
Great. Jean-Claude, do you want to contextualize how equity and inclusion are playing a role as well in your institution at ASYV?
Absolutely. We believe that all children, every young person deserves a loving home, deserve education. As you said earlier, this is a human right. Building equity in Rwanda, what it means for us, it's first of all recruiting kids from all 30 districts. Second of all, when we talk about inclusion, recruiting more than 60% of young girls. Even though the government of Rwanda has done a great job as trying to put all kids in school, but they still face some tuition. But we do all of this for free. We take on 500 young women and men, but our results show through a holistic approach that 100% graduate high school. And this is how we sort of build an inclusion among the young people. And also the use of technology. We believe that all the young people who come here should have access to the best possible education so that they become competitive on the market. Nobody on the job market will say, I'm sorry, we're going to give you a job because you're an orphan or because you're a refugee.
Great. Terence, in terms of the role of technology and how it does play a part as well, could you share with us some of the learnings where technology has been used and fronted as a way to equalize and also include more learners from underserved communities across Africa?
Technology indeed has helped us, and we have leveraged on it to ensure that we have a greater reach to more learners. Pandemic times taught us very great lessons when the lockdown era came. In the early days, we could only teach 30 learners in person within a class in our office in Accra, Ghana. Likewise, I also felt that technology makes it convenient. Also the design of our normal streets in Kenya, there's a lot of hustle and bustle, and the same is in downtown Accra and all these African cities, if you've been there. So can you imagine if a person living with a disability has to navigate through that hustle and bustle to come to my office, attend class? That is so tough. But when we did it using technology, leveraging on technology, we now reach to them in a very convenient manner in the comfort space of their homes. So hosting all these e-learning platforms online, the learners being able to meet the trainers online, and the learners also undertaking peer-to-peer training and collaborating online, really technology was a game changer. We would not have achieved what we've achieved to date without technology. And I really feel that we've learned a lot.
That's great to know that also the work you're doing is reaching other parts of Africa like Senegal and the other countries that you mentioned. Vikas, I want to hear your thoughts as well on this, where we are taking learnings from the existing evidence where technology has played a significant role. Tell us about how that has transformed the lives of young learners from where you sit at the T4 Education.
So what's really important when it comes to addressing this is that we have to somehow or another fit in the conversation about government and the public sector. If we believe in equity, our role is to make sure that public sector systems function really well, because therein lies the argument that we're making, which is the technology being an enabler of equity and inclusion in education. The one thing that I have learned over my time in education, which is now coming up to almost 15 years, is how people believe that there's conventional wisdom almost that believes that the teacher can be removed from this equation. And the reality is that it cannot and should not be removed from the equation. And so when we think about the capacity building of systems, I think we necessarily have to think about the capacity building of the teacher workforce and their use of technology in the classroom. It is wishful thinking to think that we can do away with schools or formal structures. That is not going to happen, at least not in my lifetime. And in which case, we have to work within a certain context and paradigm to make sure that we deploy these tools very effectively. And the cornerstone of that is to make sure that the teacher has the ability, the skills, the knowledge, and the experience to do so. Now, let's have a look at who's doing what and how we're approaching it as T4. So what we have done because of the pandemic is create professional learning groups on the T4 Communities app, which you can download on iOS and on the Play Store. And what we have through that are teachers sharing best practices as to how they're doing things. And the thing that I learned most is peer-to-peer learning is the game changer. Whilst it's okay for the large tech companies or any tech vendors to come and say, hey, this is what you can do, actually it has a lot more currency and a lot more stickiness when a teacher says, hey, I've used this and this is how I would perhaps do things. And so what we created was a series of summits over 3 years called the Teacher Tech Summits in partnership with the World Bank and a number of foundations, and that actually brought together tens of thousands of teachers to learn about, well, what are their peers doing around the world and how we can incorporate these practices in our classrooms. And so a few points to summarize. One is, I think we have to really seriously take on the role of the government and seeing how we can strengthen their abilities to make decisions. The second is not just government, we have to think about teachers and their centrality in using these tools. And the third thing I'll say to you is that technology is just one tool. There are many ways to make sure little Johnny in the classroom learns. And so we have to use the best tools possible to achieve that. Now, it may be the case that pencil and paper are the best tools that we have, the best tech that we have. We should also look at it from that basis.
Right. I like that you've brought it all out, from the government side down to the implementers or the teachers side, and also to the learners as well. Jean-Claude, if I come to you, your institution has a catch-up program that allows some of the students who had dropped out of school to then catch up on the lost learning. Does technology have a role to play in that? And also, how has that worked out for the learners themselves and the teachers as well, and the underserved communities?
Absolutely. Technology has a huge role to play. Our catch-up program is what we like to call the enrichment year. So in this year, we go back to the basic. Most of our learners have a grade 3 level or third grader reading level. And we want to bring them to a 7 or 8 year grade level. And so what we do is focus more than 70% of our time into learning language, communication, life skills, and a bit of numeracy and lots of digital literacy. And so we sort of do this by exposing them to computers and in the classroom. All of our lessons are tailored for them to sort of build their critical thinking. And within a year, they are strong enough to be placed into the senior 4, 5, and 6, the normal high school program. So this is what we've been able to do. So we can take any students irrespective of their own academic levels. We understand that if you're hungry, if you're sad and live without your parent and lost a parent, or you're emotionally or physically abused, you will not do well in school. I also want to go back into what Vikas just said, because partnering with other institutions is probably the best possible way that Agahozo Shalom has been able to now take our model into the community. Today, we are working with 500 teachers across Rwanda who are serving their community of about 60,000 students. How do we do that? Well, years ago, I think in Rwanda, we had a program called One Laptop Per Child. We gave the laptop to the child, but we never gave anything to the teacher. And today we are advocating for the teachers to have the laptop, and we are advocating for the teachers to have the training and also the teaching methodology. Vikas really said it so well. Like, technology is one tool, but if you don't know how to use it, and if you don't know how to teach with it, and so we the best possible way to do it is exactly what we are doing. So I can't wait to collaborate with T4, because we are doing a peer-to-peer training program. We bring the teachers, because you bring a consultant, they come and tell you what to do and they go. But when you're a teacher and next to another teacher, it's okay to ask the silly questions. Hey, my buddy, how do you do this? How do you do that? Most likely you go to the next university. And so these are really some of the things we've done. And today we are expanding our model into the communities around us, thanks to the Education Resilience Program for the with the MasterCard Foundation, where we're really helping the teachers to become leaders in teaching.
Great. And thank you for that. And I guess also here on EdTech Mondays, we do advocate for fostering collaboration. And it's great to hear you say that you can't wait to partner with T4 Education. Terence, if I come back to you now, of course, right now we are faced with a double-edged challenge, which is the cost of education and exclusion, where underserved communities are concerned. How do we address this pressing challenge?
I think Vikas pointed it quite well. This cost thing can be handled, and the starting point is political will. Political will is a game changer. Whether we like it or not, the policymakers have the power to drive that discussion in the right direction or the wrong direction. For example, in Kenya, how did I get entry into Kenya and begin the programs in Kenya? It was a Kenyan government leader within the ICT authority who reached out to AWS and said, hey, AWS, we've seen AWS restart. We love it. We think it can benefit our young people in Kenya. AWS did not even have an idea about bringing restart to Kenya. But once she put in that request, and this is Nyambura Kariuki, I really thank her. Once she put in that request, AWS reached out to us and said, hey, you are our collaborating organization. Can you go and do capacity building for Kenya? Can you go help them to set up that program there? And she just needed to put in that request as a policymaker. So also alliances and partnerships have been mentioned here. And then I go back to Kenya, I found an alliance at a level like I'd never seen. MasterCard Foundation was there to fund that program. The ICT authority of the Kenyan government was there to give us trainers through the Ajira digital program they underwent the training of trainers. And then they also brought in the Kenya Alliance of, the Kenya Private Sector Alliance, which once these learners had finished their training, they could easily onboard onto jobs. But then back to Azubi Africa and some things we've seen, because there's a gap, a skills gap in technology in the world. And the skill set needed is at, let's say, level 2 engineering and above. We came to note that training a level 2 engineer is super expensive. And if you were to tell a young African to pay $3,000 upfront for that training, they don't have it. So we thought around a business model that could support these young people to train. We went and borrowed the money from our investors with low interest rates out there, formulated a business model we called the income share agreement. And we reached out to the African learners and tell them, look here, you don't need to pay it upfront. You don't need to pay $3,000 upfront. This will be paid for you by the investor. Once you finish the training and you get a job, you can start paying back the income share agreement through installments, and the virtuous circle can go on. We can fund another cohort of new learners. So I'm thinking EdTech entrepreneurship, interesting business models, partnerships, as we've talked about, as well as government political will, and ensure that we are moving forward together. I think those are some of the things I've seen where this double-edged barrier that is caused. That has been my experience, and I think it's something that will always be there, but we need to keep on thinking around how do we innovatively solve that challenge.
Great. Vikas, I can see you're just about to say something. Please go ahead.
The thing that we've rounded on in this conversation is the role of government, for sure. We all accept that actually government has to be engaged, they have to actually be inspired, all those things which are good. Now, let's look at the other end. Government will never be a technology company. Government will never innovate to the degree that we need. And therefore, we do rely upon that tech and innovation ecosystem that exists. And in that regard, what you do at the Mastercard Foundation, I think, is pretty special in making sure that you have these conversations and bring together startups and innovators. Now here, from my previous background, I used to run a corporate venture capital fund investing in edtechs. And what we found, which was really interesting, was that everyone believes in education for sure when you get into the sector. But however, when you came to speak to startup and startup teams, the really critical learning that we had was that they knew about software engineering. They knew about technology. They did not know much about actually education, the process of education. And so anything that we can do to fuse together these two things, I think stands to the betterment and the probable success of these tools in the classroom. Often what you have is you have off-the-shelf products that are being shopped around by typically large tech companies. And what we need is actually more tools and tech that is appropriate for the context in which we teach our children. And so that is, on the other end of the spectrum, bringing the focus to the tech and innovation part of it, is that if we do want it to be an enabler of equity and inclusion, then we also need to pay a lot more attention to, well, what is the process of education and what is it that we can do to strengthen that, as opposed to just get excited about megabits and gigabits and all the technology side of it. Actually, let's get excited about the educational process is what my whole message is to tech innovators.
One more thing to what Vikas said, affordability. That's one thing the government can also help to do. Reduce the cost of the internet in the school. The fiber now is getting closer to the school. Let it be affordable for everybody. And also some of these technology as well being affordable. So I just wanted to add this to that. One of the things as well, I just wanted to say right now, we are in this education resilience program we have with the Mastercard Foundation. We have approached the Carnegie Mellon University that has a campus here in Kigali and said, hey, as a capstone project, can you students build a platform on which all the teachers that have been trained by Agahozo Shalom and our other partner, can they be on a platform when they can interact other than WhatsApp? As WhatsApp is nice, but we want to build a platform where all of them can interact. Today, a teacher from the Eastern Province can put up a lesson of economics And a teacher in the southern province can see it instantly. And now when the teachers are collaborating, that's a proof of concept that can have multiplier effects, but it also needs affordability.
And it can still trickle down to the learners who are the main target in this case. So, when we look at the African technology developers that we do have in the EdTech ecosystem, it appears that most of them are developing for profit. So how do we make sure that these developers are creating solutions that can be really used by the learners in different institutions, and especially where affordability is an issue or is a challenge? How do we make sure that the solutions they're coming up with are not just for those who can afford, but also those who are from low-income communities, and in this case, the category of persons living with disabilities, but also refugees, IDPs, and all those other marginalized groups who still need an education to move forward in life.
And so what you have is, I believe, parents and students vote with their feet. And that is why what you've seen is the expansion of tuition centers and private education all across the world. The parents are saying there's something wrong with public education, right? And something needs to be done to that. In a similar way, when it comes to tech and tools, the reality is that, government will never be, tech providers. And so you've got to think in terms of the structures that are there that enable tech companies to actually reduce their cost of, for example, acquiring customers, the cost of accessing a market. All of these aspects are macroeconomic policy kind of subjects. If you look at America as an example, the reason why EdTech is perhaps so big over there is because there's a way of actually selling into districts, into systems, whereas I suspect what happens in many countries in Africa is that you have to go school by school by school, and that's what increases cost. And so what I'm saying is by addressing structures, we may be able to bring the cost down, but I think it's also unfair to actually level this charge on companies and all these startups and all these tech companies, saying that they are pillaging the continent because they're trying to make a living themselves. And so I do think that there's a role to play in terms of how we structure our markets and how we think about procurement of these products and services. And that's where I think nations in Africa can learn from others as to how they've done it, that ultimately will reduce the cost for parents and for learners and for schools.
Right, and we do have unique challenges such as the exclusion from education for the girl child across the continent, and we also do see the same affecting persons with disabilities, refugees, and internally displaced persons who will then be learners at some point in time. So are we saying that there's not enough products that would cater to these particular groups? And if not, then how do we make sure that we're turning the narrative, changing the narrative, and creating some sort of nexus to feed into these particular groups?
I don't think we can give up on the role of government in providing an education. It is their prime responsibility. This data point that is often wheeled out in terms of girls out of school can be fixed. That's the reality. It can be fixed. And so I think that is more a question for governments as to how they're addressing that than for tech companies. But you're right, tech can facilitate, accelerate, reach. But the primary question about inequity and human rights is that I believe of government.
Is of government, you say. And so what is the role of partnerships in this case, JC, where equity and inclusion is concerned? What is the role of partnerships in bringing this all to an equalized level or close to an equalized level?
Partnership is everything. I think Vika said it well. If edtech companies are not profitable, they'll just stop innovating. So somebody needs to take the bill, pay the bill. This is, I think, the government policy that needs to do that. I think a few years back, Microsoft had a contract with the Ministry of Education. So Microsoft certification for teachers was accessible and affordable. These are the type of policies we need to do. If HP has devices, how can subsidize those devices so they are affordable to the end user. And that's how we include people in vulnerability. And so this is what we try to do before we reach out to the MasterCard Foundation. We went to the Ministry of Education, and they were so responsive. We actually invited the state minister. I said, this is what we are doing right here. Would you be okay endorsing us if we were to reach out to the MasterCard Foundation for this education resilience program? When the minister saw it, he said, this is amazing, this is innovative. Teachers were able to teach during COVID simply because they had been afforded the technology to do so. And so once we did that, we reached out to the MasterCard Foundation, who in return said, okay, reach out to the ministry and said, if you guys, if this is working for you guys as well. And so what we do, each time we go into a school, we need to make sure that the teachers have the access to devices, and there is also internet. And now this is the government who is guiding us where we are going for our next training program. So partnership is critical to all the work that we do, but they also need to make it affordable for everybody. If a device is $800, I mean, it's only 1% that will have access to it. But if government makes it accessible for like maybe $200 and put on a mechanism for people to pay it through loans.
Great, thank you. And we did have a number of refugee students who did share their stories on how technology has enabled them gain meaningful education. Some of them are in refugee camps in Kenya. Some have had to transition from countries like Burundi into Rwanda and then to the United States. And then there's some who have moved from Somalia to the United States and have gained a good education just by using different technology solutions. And I think this is just testament of what technology can do to enable equity and inclusion as well, in terms of giving access to young Africans who do not have a good education or who can't afford education based on the circumstances they're living in.
In 2015, I had to leave my beloved country, Burundi, and I fled to Rwanda for my safety. Hence, like many refugees, accessing to trainings, opportunities that will allow you to really integrate in your country was a little bit of a challenge. Some of the challenges were just, access to resources, but also like paperwork, documentations that will allow me to register for these opportunities. With EdTech, of course, I was able to just an email and internet, I was able to just access some of the world-class training. So not only this prepared me for my transition to the new country, but also prepared me to just, work for the gig economy and, work anywhere from just my PC. So, and today I still use EdTech to not only empower other people, but also to upskill myself. And personally, as a refugee, I've seen how the traditional ways couldn't work at some point with, somehow, for example, to attend a school, you need to register and they ask you for documentation. And that time as a refugee, you don't have the right documentation that enables you to register. Yeah, so I feel like that EdTech really just, breaks those roadblocks.
My journey in EdTech is deeply rooted in my passion for technology. From a young age, I found myself fascinated by the possibilities it presented, especially in how it could impact education. This interest only grew stronger in my teenage years, where I witnessed firsthand the power of technology in transforming learning environments. I realized that technology had an immense potential to democratize the learning. So this realization was a turning point for me. I saw how EdTech could reach individuals in ways traditional methods could not, through personalized learning experiences and also flexible study times and tailored learning materials. The promise of a truly inclusive and accessible education system fueled my drive to contribute to this field. So I dedicated myself to the world of education technology.
I was a refugee. I moved to the US when I was very young. And so I was lucky enough that I didn't have to I was lucky enough that I had access to sort of in-person traditional schooling in a sense, and a lot of folks don't have that access. So I think EdTech has that capability to bridge the gap where traditional schooling isn't as available. It's able to democratize, it's able to empower learners, and in certain cases, it also able to drive economic growth. EdTech as broadly can be and I think will be very life-changing. I think we need to possibly look at it in a sort of an addition to with traditional schooling as opposed to replacing it completely. But again, for folks that don't have the ability to access or it's impossible to access traditional schooling, it's a massive sort of leg up for that population.
And so as we come close to the end of this conversation, I want to hear from us, what kind of impact has the work that we are doing in our organizations brought to the African continent? And I'm going to start with Vikas, because I know that T4 Education started during about the time of the pandemic and has since morphed into this huge organization that is serving different communities around the world. Do you want to tell us about the impact that it's had?
I believe that lots of really great stuff is happening all across Africa in education, actually. And one of the mechanisms we created was the Africa Education Medal, which is a prize to actually showcase change makers. And so last year, Professor Mamogeti Fakeng from the University of Cape Town at that point was the winner of our prize. But this year, I'm really pleased that one of my fellow panelists is a finalist in the Africa Education Medal, and we're able to shine a spotlight on his work in Rwanda, and likewise 9 other incredible individuals. In a similar vein, we also have a platform called World's Best School Prizes that we created 2 years ago. And this year, there are, I believe, 6 schools across Africa that have been shortlisted in our top 10 shortlist, which are 50 schools in total, because there are 5 categories. Now, in these schools, what you have is an example of what excellence looks like. And so you can go from a school in Nigeria that is prioritizing female menstrual health, as an example. You can go to a school in Kenya that is all about decolonization and the Afrocentricism of schools, which I think is a massive subject. You can go to South Africa in the township of Soweto, what a private school is doing to enable access and equity in that community, and such forth. You have these incredible examples, because I believe that the one thing that actually moves the needle now is no longer policy, it's actually storytelling. And it's by bringing these stories up in front of people, you're able to show that change is possible. And we are living amongst present day leaders, who are doing incredible things. We do not need to always talk about Mandela. We can talk about JC as an example, because what he is doing and what these finalists are doing and what these schools are doing requires support. But because this is an overriding narrative of doom and gloom, we need to break through that to show that change is possible, and we are absolutely engaged in that process. And what you at the MasterCard Foundation is doing is exactly providing, incredible support and capacity to all these institutions to actually accelerate, which I absolutely applaud. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you so much, Vikas. Terence, what kind of impact has your organization had around the continent, especially where underserved African communities are concerned?
Yeah, in the spirit of storytelling, I will I'll dive into one particular one that was very close to my heart, and I really loved it. Indeed, we approached all these learners with a value proposition that will get you trained, will get you certified, will get you hired. And after our first iteration of training in Kenya, an approach was made to us from the Danish Refugee Council and told us, hey, look here, you've done something for persons with disability, you've done something for women in IT, and the Kenyan youth at large. But do you know we have another segment of youth in this country that is almost like the forgotten youth? And these were the youth living in Kakuma and Dadaab refugee settlement. And mid last year, when we were able to certify a number of them on the AWS Restart program and also put them along the path of, hey, you'll not only go back home in peacetime, but you'll also go back with a certificate that means you have got these skill sets and you can contribute meaningfully to building your country, that meant a lot. But more interestingly, later on when the German government approached us and told us, we have a large population of young people who've arrived from Eastern Europe because of the Russo-Ukrainian war. Can you do for them something as relates to cloud computing and its training? We are already doing coding Schule, and we are teaching them coding. We did that, and we went back in there with what we'd learned from our refugee camps in Kenya and their settlements here. And we trained these young Ukrainians. All of them were able to certify. All of them were able to get jobs within the German economy. I was particularly happy to learn that 2 of them secured jobs in an international blue chip corporation, Deloitte. That was really, really a good testament. Africa to the world. It's not all doom and gloom, as Vikas has said. We've got a lot of good things happening at the grassroots, and we can share it with the world. And I think that was a very beautiful thing that a young trainer, Samson Boama in Ghana, from Azubi, Africa, was able to do for those young Ukrainians. And I really loved enjoying the LinkedIn posts after they had certified. They were really, really happy, but they're also grateful. You know, you lost your homeland. You're in Germany. You can't make head or tail of what's going on, but now you've been given a new lease of life to contribute meaningfully. I mean, that was a very beautiful story. And we are hoping to build on such.
JC, I want to hear from you as well, the impact that some of the programs you're having at ASYV are having on the young people, the young learners who come from these marginalized groups and refugee as well as IDP communities.
We believe that education is the one gift that keeps on giving. I'm in the presence of great organization, my fellow panelists, and the MasterCard Foundation set up a huge, I would say, challenging agenda to say, by 2030, 30 million young people need to be at work. In Rwanda, 300,000 people need to be at work. So we here at Agahozo Shalom need to think different. We need to work and collaborate with every other organization, public sector, other institution like the Carnegie Mellon University, to ensure that when young people come out of high school, they are fit to go into a vocational training program, they are fit to go into a college, or they are fit to go straight into employment. That is our goal. That is what keeps us at night every day, that we want to make sure that we make our contribution to the 300,000 people who will be at work by 2030.
Thank you all, gentlemen, for making time to be with us on this edition of EdTech Mondays, where we focused on technology as an enabler for equity and inclusion for underserved communities. Well, what a conversation, government's role, but at the same time, we also need to look into the technologies that are being developed and think about the affordability aspect as well when looking into developing solutions that can work to bring solutions around equity and inclusion around the African continent. And so I want to say a big thank you to our panelists, Terence Chibire, Senior Trainer and Head of AWS Academy at Azubi, Africa. And we also did have Vikas Porter, who is the Chief Executive Officer and Founder, T4 Education, and Jean-Claude Nkulichi Mfuda, who is the Executive Director, Agahozo Shalom Youth Village in Rwanda, also known as ASYV. My name is Joy Doreen Bira. Thank you all so much for being a part of this conversation. Until the next one, you can reach us on our email address, edtechmondays@mastercardfdn.org. And you can also use our social media handles, MastercardFDN, that is on Twitter, and the rest of them on Facebook and LinkedIn. You will be able to get to us. Thank you all so much for taking part.
EdTech Mondays Africa is supported by the MasterCard Foundation Center for Innovative Teaching and Learning in ICT and is part of the Foundation's Young Africa Works programming.